Stor's stronghold, an island far off the coast of Valkenheim, where the bones of an ancient serpent are kept, tended to, and treasured by a cult of warriors who had been isolated and cast out of their home in the icy lands of Vikings. These outcasts, known as the Jormungandr, after the god they worshipped, were a zealous, ferocious, and unforgiving cult. When invited into the cult, one was not made a warrior simply by virtue of being. They were put through rigorous and demanding challenges, tests to push the young warrior to their absolute limits and to prove their worth in the eyes of the great serpent. One young warrior was simply known as Thyra. Thyra was not born amongst the cult. She was born in a village in eastern Valkenheim. Born with a notorious scaled skin that the Vikings had come to fear, she was disowned and banished at the age of 8 for no reason she could understand. Sent on a boat to Stor's stronghold, Thyra was welcomed to the cult with open arms, and she grew stronger over the course of years, but she never understood why she had been abandoned. Occasionally, Jormungandr would leave the isle at the behest of Viking clans to aid in war, and at times they might return. Those that did not were welcomed into the coils of the serpent, where they would rest forever amongst the glistening scales of his embrace. To die in glorious battle pleased the serpent, but to yield and fail in your duty is to be devoured by the serpent, for the great snake does not suffer the weak to join it in the battle of Ragnarok. Thyra, seeking anything, any kind of place or understanding, swore she would not be weak, and when her time came to leave the island of Stor for her chance at war, she would die in battle or would live a victor. She would prove not only to her cult, but to her family and to herself that she was mighty. She was strong. She was a warrior. But many nights Thyra would sneak away from her cot or bed and look out at the night sky, wondering, did she really wish to fight for a serpent that she had never seen? Did she truly wish to fight for a cause that she was not born into? How would her parents even care? If she were to live or die in battle, would they even notice? It was all a lot for her to take in. She wanted to be devoted, and yet something held her back. When she turned 22, her chance finally came. Having taken the final initiation rituals of the serpent and having her hide baptized in the venom of Jormungandr, Thyra rose from the burning, searing pain as a warrior of Stor, and just in time for her chance to be made real. A battle was to be waged. A battle was brewing in a valley just north of the mire. She and 3 other Jormungandrs were called to help the forces of Horkos wage war against a Chimera vanguard force. The battle that Thyra found herself in was nothing like what she dreamed it would be. In her mind, she had seen battles as glorious spectacles of combat, the sight of blood spilled and honorable death mingled with the sight of solid and unquestionable victory through strength of will and soul. But this was a barbaric sight. The warriors who fought were like wild beasts. They swung weapons with the savagery of a feral animal. The roars and cries of war mingled with the wails and shrieks of those cut down and left to bleed. Thyra was dumbfounded and horror-struck, but she had her oaths, her vows, and still her questions. Perhaps to die in this battle would show her devotion. She would be devoted to the cult, and she would fight and die in glorious combat, even if the combat she dreamed of was far from what she would take part in, though she knew that, in her heart, this wasn't what she wanted. Thyra lost sight of her comrades quickly in the thick of the violence. She would swing her hammer with a ferocity mixed with the primal desire for slaughter, but also with a need to fend off her enemy. Though she managed to strike down a Kensei, a Shaolin, and even an overzealous conqueror, she still felt no joy in this battle. This was not what she expected. This felt more like a desperate struggle for survival, not a clashing of ideals where death promises honor. As she struggled to wrap her mind around all this, she found her next foe, a centurion with his helmet off. The two locked eyes and attacked. The centurion was skilled, staying in and out of her attacks, removing himself from her wild and furious swings of her hammer. Once, when she made too wide a swing, he would respond by a hard punch to her jaw. She would then reply with a punch to his gut, her fist denting metal as she did so. The centurion lunged at her, and she evaded, swinging at his head with her hammer. He blocked the blow, and then grabbed her by the throat, slamming her to the earth. The two began to grapple. Thyra wrapped her arms around the centurion's neck to choke him out, but the centurion began striking her kidneys over and over again with his elbow to break her hold. Unable to withstand the punishment, she released him, but then grabbed his shoulder and swung him back down as she climbed on top of him. Straddling his hips, she began punching him in the face again and again, but the Centurion responded with a punch of his own, rattling teeth and causing Thyra's vision to blur. She rolled and scrambled to her feet, plunging the butt of her hammer into the Centurion's knee. He snarled back and tried to slash at her with his gladius. She threw herself onto his arm to catch his momentum, and the two fell once more, rolling across the blood and dirt of the battlefield. Finally, after a vicious kick to the stomach from the Centurion, he got to his feet, breathing heavily and aiming his gladius down at Thyra, who had not gotten up. She looked up at him, their eyes glaring into each other. She felt fear, despair. She would die here, still with questions, still unsure of herself, still not sure if the serpent would welcome her. Still not sure if anyone would care. And then the Centurion spoke. "Stay down," he snapped. And with that, he ran. Chimera was retreating, and he was joining them in the escape. Thyra stared at him as he ran, her heart racing and her brain dancing with wonder and disbelief. He'd spared her. That Centurion could easily have slain her right here, but instead he left her on the ground. She was alive. She was relieved, but that relief slowly turned to disgrace. Why? Why had he not finished the deed? She was both amazed but also outraged. He left her in disgrace. Let her live. Wasn't it the goal of every Jormungandr to die in glorious battle and embrace the great serpent? And this Centurion had denied her that end. He would pay for it. Yes, that was why she was thinking of him. He must suffer. He must die for this transgression. She must redeem her honor. With the battle over, she left the celebration Horkos was throwing and pursued the retreating Chimera. For miles she tracked and followed them, careful to avoid any towns or villages that might spot her or alert her quarry. The Chimera continued south for several miles, traveling many days and nights. However, 7 days after the battle, Thyra finally saw the Centurion she sought. He was by himself, wandering towards the nearby stream. She knew not why, but she would confront him at last. As he stopped at the brook, he removed his helmet and prepared to remove his chest plate as well. He was going to bathe. But no, not yet. She leapt from her hiding place and raised her hammer. "Face me!" she screamed. The Centurion rounded quick, grabbing for his blade. "You!" he cried. "You're the Jormungandr from the skirmish." "And you shamed me," she cried. "How dare you? Why did you not kill me? Why did you disgrace me by letting me live?" "You want to die?" he demanded, drawing his blade. "What foolishness!" "Silence!" Thyra screamed as she hurled herself at him. She had the advantage of surprise and rage, but the Centurion still seemed undeterred. No matter what she did, she couldn't strike him down. Even when he left obvious openings, it was like something held back her hand. Something made her hesitate. Dancing around each other, the two traded blows furiously, and the sound of their scuffle caused many from the Chimera encampment to break and run to see what was happening. When they saw the Jormungandr Thyra grappling with the Centurion, they were horror-struck, demanding to know what was happening. "Do not interfere," the Centurion cried. "This is for me to deal with." He then turned his glare back to Thyra, who was fuming. "Why do you wish to die?" he demanded. She thought. Did she wish to die? Of course she did. To truly be accepted by the serpent, one must die in glorious battle. So she answered. "I wish for honor," she answered. "And only by dying with honor in combat can I truly receive my blessing." The Centurion stared at her for a long moment, and she stared back. She wasn't even sure of the words she spoke. How could they be true? They weren't true to her heart. He marched forward. She prepared to swing her hammer, but before she could, he threw his gladius at her. Thyra dodged out of the way fast, hitting the ground. "How dare you dodge me?" he roared at her. "You desire death in combat? Then why did you dodge? Your clothes, your armor, remove them. For if you wish to die in battle, you only risk life if you wear them. And your weapon, discard it. To hold a weapon means you intend to hold off your enemy and live. Though you preach of death, you act as if you wish to live. You speak to me of honor and glory, And yet I can see in your heart, you don't even understand the meaning of those words. You are devoted to nothing."
"What are you saying?" she asked.
"I spared you, because in your eyes I saw the fire of one who wants answers, who seeks meaning, who wants to live until she can find those answers. But you say you want to die. Tell me, what would that accomplish? So you die, and your name obtains honor. But what do you gain? What would the world gain? Do you truly find peace? What mark do you leave on the world, when the only thing you leave behind is a name?"
What do you know of pride and honor?" she demanded.
It was a desperate cry, the cry of a child, the cry of an infant who still was flailing at the world, and the centurion answered calmly, "I know I would rather live with honor, live with a purpose, than die with it. For if I live with honor, then I will never fear death." The long silence between Thyra and the strange centurion lasted a long moment. She took in his words, and they seemed to be destroying her very consciousness, her very soul. After a few more moments of glaring, the centurion picked up his sword and walked back with his comrades to the camp, leaving the Jormungandr Thyra awestruck and confused. She didn't know how to feel. Angry? Perhaps that would be justifiable, but she didn't feel so much angry as she did confused. All of her upbringing she'd been taught of the glory of battle and the honor of dying for the great serpent. But when she'd seen battle, she saw no glory in it. And when faced with death on it, she had been terrified. Her mindset was not right. Her devotion perhaps was misplaced. But if not to the great serpent, then to what? Where should she be? What should she be devoted to? She had no heart to return to Stor Stronghold, but she knew that she was not ready to join a faction like Chimera or Horkos. Instead, she made the only decision she thought was rational. She tailed the Chimera party. For a few days she followed, watching, observing, and contemplating. But on the third day, something changed. The Chimera group was besieged by a bandit party consisting of a few disgraced Vikings and Wulan forces. The Chimera warriors, still licking their wounds from their fight with Horkos, were barely prepared for the attack. Soldiers fell like toy tin creatures in a fierce gale, and soon only a handful remained standing, including the centurion who had spared her. As she watched the centurion struggling to hold back the attacking raider, the attacking berserker, a Tiandi, a Shaolin that he managed to gut, she suddenly felt something. She remembered the dream, the glorious battle, and as she watched the centurion struggling, she felt that rush, that sensation of glory. Grabbing her hammer, she ran into the fray and screamed as she slammed her hammer across the jaw of the Tiandi, his helmet proving no protection from her. A raider who had been leading the charge turned to see her and bellowed a war cry. He swung his giant axe at her, but she ducked. She then slammed the hammer hard against his kneecap, buckling the warrior, and with a bellow that would send shivers through the air, she slammed the hammer into his chest, concaving the ribs and sending blood shooting out of the raider's nose and mouth like a fountain. She destroyed his ribcage and punctured his lungs. As the raider lay dying, the will of his followers began to fade with his life. Thyra beat her chest furiously, her hands itching for battle, her eyes searching for a new target, but none presented. In fact, many were turning and fleeing fast. None had expected a wild Jormungandr to attack. Seeing them flee, she dropped her hammer, the high of combat fading gradually as the centurion rose to his feet, clutching his side. "What did I lack?" she asked him. "Conviction," he answered. The Chimera detachment was all but destroyed, with only a few left to claim they had survived. The centurion, whose name was Marcus Avum, would lead them back to their base of operations to resupply and rest. He invited Thyra to join them, but Thyra was still uncertain. She wasn't sure she wanted to fight for Chimera necessarily. She had no devotion to it. She hadn't come to Avum's rescue because of his commitment to Chimera. She'd come to his rescue because of him. He had been her conviction. What did this mean for her? What did this mean for her future? How could she truly call herself a devotee of the cult when her heart now yearned for something besides the serpent? She explained her concerns to Marcus, and he simply shrugged his shoulders. Then I hope you will find that which you can be devoted to. But she already had. For the full journey back to the Chimera lands, Marcus had been aware of a following presence, a figure that walked only out of sight but always able to keep track of them. He would smile to himself at the knowledge that there was indeed a serpent tailing them, a devoted warrior who was finally finding what she was seeking. Months passed, but over the course of those months, on certain nights, the sentries and guards at Feronia would notice Marcus Avum leaving the safety of the fortress walls late at night, when the sun was down. They would ask where he went, and he would simply say he was out patrolling, but some knew better where he snuck off to and for why. For when one is devoted to you, you don't just die for them. You live for them. And Thyra the Jormungandr had found someone new to live her life for.